Well, welcome everyone. Please turn off your cell phones or any phones that you have. I'm Al Richardson from the core planning team of this public forum. Thank you for coming out this evening to learn more about efforts in Erie that are deterring jail time for youth. And many thanks to the 12 co-sponsors of the forum. You'll find their names on the back of the printed program. Special thanks to the Erie Public Schools for making this space available, and to Gannon University for providing the posters and printing the program copies. It seems that the date we selected for this forum is the same date as Governor Tom Wolf's second inauguration, and that's where our local state representatives are at this time, as well as County Executive Kathy Dahlkemper and Erie Mayor Joe Schember. Some of them are represented tonight by staff from their Erie offices: Regina Smith from Senator Dan Laughlin's office, Chris Rush is representing Pat Harkins, Michael Outlaw from the mayor's office. Would Regina and Chris and Michael and any other representatives please stand to be recognized? Also, Erie City Councilwoman Kathy, Erie City Councilwoman Kathy Schaff, and any other city council and county council members in the audience, please stand. And thank you for attending. The forum this evening is titled, How to Avoid the School to Prison Pipeline. Until recently, I never heard that expression. What is the school to prison pipeline? Here's what I found out. A growing number of students around the country are referred to law enforcement for misconduct fairly typical of adolescent behavior informally handled by school administrators when I was a student. As a result, juvenile courts are spending more time addressing school behavior issues. This trend began with the 1994 Gun-Free Schools Act, mandating that states enact laws requiring districts to expel any student who brings a firearm to school. Over years, the net widened to include fighting, truancy, and even smoking and dress code violations that can lead to automatic suspensions and expulsions in some schools. There's evidence that zero-tolerance discipline policies and the attendant increase in policing and surveillance spur students to drop out of school. Dropping out is a trigger warning to eventual incarceration. Currently, more than 3 million children are suspended or expelled from school each year, which is double the 1970s rate. This national surge is believed to be largely due to zero-tolerance policies that mandate harsh punishments for even minor infractions of school rules. I don't have corresponding data for the local public schools, but data and causes aside, you're about to find out from our learned panel what actually happens when a hypothetical Erie High School student misbehaves and what variations could yield better outcomes. It's my pleasure now to introduce the panel's moderator, Ken Nixon, Jr. Born and raised in Erie, Ken is a 1996 graduate of Central High School and graduated from Clarion University in 2002. After working as an emotional support teacher in Pittsburgh public schools, he returned to Erie to work in the school district as teacher, assistant principal, and currently coordinator of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Ken and his wife, Tisha, have 4 children. And if Ken will give me a hand, I will step down and turn everything over to Ken. Thank you.
Hey, sorry, everyone. Good evening. My name is Ken Nixon. I'm very thankful, privileged to be part of doing this tonight. So what I'd like to do to start off is I'd like to go through each of our panelists and read a brief biography from each. So how I have it is we have it in alphabetical order. So I'm going to start off with Mrs. Bea Bursky, our Erie School District Assistant Superintendent. Mrs. Bursky is the Assistant Superintendent of Erie's Public Schools. She has held this position for the past 2 years. Prior to being Assistant Superintendent, she was the Director of Human Resources for Erie's Public Schools for 8 years during the financial crisis. Before moving to Central Office Administration, Bea worked as a building principal, guidance counselor, classroom teacher. She has been in urban education for the past 33 years. She has been an active member of Delta Kappa Gamma, has taught graduate classes at Westminster College, and enjoys spending time with her family. John Fox, Juvenile Probation Officer Supervisor. Mr. Fox has served as a Juvenile Probation Officer for Erie County for the past 23 years and has been a supervisor since 2007. He served as a member of the state committee that created the Juvenile Case Management System and is the system administrator of the database for Erie County. He is also responsible for the administration of the PA Justice Network, also known as JNet, database for all Erie County municipal police departments and county agencies requiring access to the PA Police and FBI criminal records, and is a member of the Erie County Protection from Abuse Task Force and Erie County Truancy Task Force. He is a veteran of the First Gulf War, having served in the U.S. Navy. Upon discharge, he earned a bachelor's degree in criminal justice with a minor in history. He graduated summa cum laude from Edinburgh University in 1995. Sue Mack, Magistral District Judge, Judge Mack has been the Magistral District Judge for the City of Erie, First Ward, since August 2001. During her time as judge, she established the First Ward Juvenile Diversion Committee for first-time juvenile offenders and created the Home Chore Program, bringing together community service volunteers from adult probation, nonprofit community group BEST, and the City of Erie Code Enforcement to assist those elderly and low-income homeowners in need of minor home repairs. She also spearheaded the Wayne School Attendance Project to reduce truancy and created a 2-hour education program to educate parents and students regarding school attendance. She is very involved in truancy task force groups at local, district, and state levels. She has served and continues to serve on many community boards such as Erie Earn-It, Mercyhurst College Alumni Advisory Committee, Erie District Office of State Parole, Boys and Girls Club, Citizens Advisory Committee, Gadenza Erie Advisory Board, Gadenza Incorporated Governing Board, Truancy and Protection from the Abuse Task Forces. She is also involved in the state, district, and local levels of the Special Court Judges Association, SCJAP. She previously held the position of president of District 1 and has served as president of the state association. She is the only person in 45 years to serve from this district. Prior to becoming a magistral district judge, Judge Mack was the executive director of Serenity Hall Incorporated, Crossroads, a multi-service chemical dependency treatment program for adults, including detoxification, residential, outpatient, partial, halfway house, and outreach components. She received her bachelor's degree in criminal justice with double minors in police science and juvenile justice. She received her master's degree in criminal justice administration from Mercyhurst College in Erie. Ray Rude, Jr., Erie School District Resource Officer. Ray takes pride in being able to build relationships and bridging the gap with students as a school-based police officer, and says it is very rewarding. He has been a police officer with Erie School District Police Department for over 2 years. He is currently assigned to Woodrow Wilson Middle School, where he actively participates in the school's student assistance program. He received a degree in criminal justice from Grantham University. He's been certified with National Association of School Resource Officers, as well as an active participant and presenter for the retired State Trooper Matt Harris's Character Be About It program. Chief Daniel Spasarni, Sr., Born and raised in Erie, Dan is a 1987 graduate of Mercyhurst College with a BA in criminal justice. Hired by the City of Erie Police in 1990, Dan has worked as a patrolman, a training officer, an undercover drug detective, and a criminal investigator. Promoted to sergeant and then to lieutenant, Dan has supervised everything from white-collar crimes to burglary to major crimes and homicides. In January 2018, Lieutenant Dan was promoted to chief of police. Dan is a graduate of the Federal Bureau of Investigation's National Academy in Quantico, Virginia. Dan is married and has 4 boys. Tyler Titus, Erie School Board Director. Tyler Titus currently works at the Erie County Office of Children and Youth as an intake administrator. He serves on the Erie City School Board. He is a local advocate and consultant, as well as a proud father of 2 awesome humans and husband to an amazing partner. Ladies and gentlemen, these are our 6 panelists. So what we're going to do now, if you please turn your attention to our screens on your right or your left, we're going to play a video clip of a student by the name of Crystal. She lives in Louisville, Kentucky, and from this video, we're going to derive conversation about what would it look like for our own, an Erie County student or Erie County youth, and stem some conversation from that.
You're going to jail.
My drink! And I said the drink,
We have had problems almost every day. This past week, I think she went to school Monday, and that's probably the only day she went to school. This is all coming down on you. Do you know which way you heading to? Piggy? Do you like it? Are you sure? Because we back in the court again for the truancy. If they got to, if they feel like they have to, they could lock you up. Is that what you want? This is stuff that they can do because you gave them permission to. Look at me. Just think, if you graduate, go to a college, this is something you could talk about with pride because you could share your stories with other kids. You'll be one of the hood project kids that proved a whole lot of people wrong. And I know you can. I know you can. Your family, we know you can. Can't nobody do nothing about this but you. That's it, just you. Quit being a knucklehead.
Well, you've got the truancy is here, back here, but then right now it's the disorderly conduct resisting arrest.
Okay.
Their offer is to plead guilty to the resisting arrest. They would ask that you go on home incarceration.
All right, Ms. Turbo, this is a document marked admission of guilt. Have you had plenty of time today to go over everything on this document with your attorney, Ms. Hurley?
Yes, ma'am.
All right, Ms. Turbo, how do you plead to the charge of resisting arrest? Guilty or not guilty?
Guilty.
The sentence for that today is 20 days of home incarceration, and you are to attend school daily with no unexcused absences.
All right, what leg you want to go?
Left.
Put that chair. If you have any issues at school or at home that we don't talk about it, you just get locked up and come to the youth center. Is that gonna be a problem?
It's not going to be a problem.
It's not too tight. Not too tight.
Have you currently or recently been pregnant? Have you ever attempted suicide or caused harm to yourself?
Yeah.
Are you thinking about it now?
So again, what we wanted to do is just give you a little insight to a student like Crystal that has a background. We see the mental health. We see her being faced in front for truancy charges, and so what we want to do is take some of this information, and we want to talk about. We want you to reflect and focus in on what we would do for a student in Erie, so an Erie County student. What I'd like to do in terms of moderating this event is I'd like to approach it from the truancy aspect first, and then we can come back around to talking a little bit more about the resisting arrest aspect. But so I want everybody, all the panelists, to think about it from the truancy lens. So with that being said, the first question that I'd like to ask, and I'd like to start with Mrs. Zaberski, would be, what is the normal procedure for your organization or department when you have someone like Crystal move through your system?
One of the things that we do, first of all, would be that all of our schools look at the attendance on a daily basis. And there is usually an assistant principal or a principal who is monitoring that piece. With that, they look at the law, and you can have 3 unexcused absences before a first notice would be given. And what our hope is, and what all of our buildings are doing, is trying to reach the parent to be able to say, your child needs an excuse if they were not in school, why are they not in school, supporting our families. That's the first thing that all of our buildings are in hopes of doing. The law has changed, and it has specific guidelines that we must follow as part of school law. And so the next step is a phone call home, which we do. And then if it becomes an issue, we have what's called a school attendance improvement plan. And those plans are between the family, the student, and the school. And so our hope, again, is that the parents are involved side by side with the school, working together. If it gets to the point where we have to send a citation, the citation is then the hearing notice. One of the things we've added this year is that we've worked with the judges and we worked with the courts to have an awareness, because some of our families aren't aware of our truancy laws and our attendance laws. Though we have this a handbook, and we have some in the back, some resources for all of you if you're interested. We give the guidelines of truancy to our families. However, sometimes reading it in a book isn't going to do it. So one of the next steps that we've added was a layer of awareness, which is it's the School Improvement Truancy Plan, which is a program, and Judge Mack will be able to speak regarding that, because she actually originated that piece, but we've added it to all our schools now. So all 5 judges are on board with it, and we are in hopes of families going to do that first, so they don't have to go into hearings, and they don't have to have a fee or be charged regarding that. We want families to understand how important education and attendance would be.
Thank you. So again, I want to take that same question, and again, the normal procedure, organization, for someone like Crystal, how would you approach that, Judge Mack?
As Dr. Zaberski identified, is that there have been changes. So the Pennsylvania Public School Code was rewritten in 2016, and it gives a variety of different things that can happen. And so it does put a lot of onus on the school district to have some interventions prior to filing with the magisterial district judge. But what happens is that, so if Crystal was 6 days habitually truant, then what would happen is the school district would file a citation against Crystal and or mom. And in the state of Pennsylvania, a citation can be filed against a student once a student reaches the age of 15. But what would probably happen in the court is mom would come to the hearing and she would provide what's called an affirmative defense, and that's what's in the legislation that previously hadn't been available. And mom can present to the court that, geez, I've done everything to ensure that she goes to school. And to be honest with you, when that has been used in my court, who usually testifies on behalf of the parent is the school district. So the school district says, geez, mom is at school, dad is calling every day, and Crystal goes in the front door and goes out the back door. So both of them can be held accountable. So what we do is that once we receive the citation, we schedule a hearing immediately because time is of the essence. We don't want 30 days to pass before a student comes before the court because we're trying to intervene as early as possible to get the student back to school. That's basically all of our missions. If Crystal came before my court, one of the things that the school does present along with the information as it relates to illegal absences, they'll talk about the school attendance improvement plan. So if that plan has not been agreed to by all parties, maybe that's one of the first things I would say is that, geez, within the next 48 hours, could the group get together, get that plan together, and in the hopes that we would have a resolution and identify what the barriers are and hook up the services to the family or to the student. So we as magisterial district judges have a variety of different options that are available. We can grant a continuance, so we would come back within 30 days and say, geez, this is what the plan in place, the services are being provided, the student is attending school, and that could be the end of it. The case could actually be dismissed. But if the student is found guilty, again, there are other options that are available. It's not always court costs and fines. Community service could be given. And one of the options that we use is before and after school help. So students who haven't been attending school generally have poorer grades. So what we try to do is encourage them to interact with their teachers, get before or after school help. That could be converted to community service. So again, what we're trying to do is identify the barriers. There's a lot of services available in our community, and there's a lot out there in the audience tonight. And I hope that you take their brochures because there is information that are available to our parents and students, and that's one of the things we're trying to accomplish today too, is to get that information out there.
Thank you. And got a little bit ahead of myself here. What we do is we have for this segment here, we have 3 questions, and we'll ask those questions, and each person will have about 4 minutes to speak up on individual questions, and then we will have a guest speaker for a moment, and then we will open the floor up around 8 o'clock for open forum for question and answer. And we also have some key audience members that I'll introduce here shortly. So, School Resource Officer, Mr. Rood, what would be your interaction with this student in terms of you start to see a student falling into truancy and just kind of that path? What would be something that you would do as far as procedure-wise?
Well, as far as truancy, my department doesn't handle that. We go through the counselors, Ms. Sabersky's office and all that. But as far as behavior and patterns and all that, where I would step in is in the mediation form. I would go to the behavioral specialist, say, hey, I'm noticing a continuing behavior for this child. They're not showing up to school. They're acting different when they're here. They're disruptive. They're disrespectful. We need to step in and start talking with them, see what's going on. Could be something at home, could be something at school. The biggest thing is we don't know what it is now, and we have to know. That way, we are able to step in the middle of it, try to fix it so it won't escalate further. As far as Crystal's situation, like I said, truancy, I wouldn't be involved in, but for the resisting arrest, since she's in a courtroom and that, and she's getting house incarceration, it seems to be a misdemeanor level. So it would depend on the situation. I've had kids at Wilson resist a little bit, but nothing major. I wouldn't really step in and charge them with resisting arrest for them just, not walking down the hall with me or not separating from an issue. But what I would do is I would start with peer mediations with the behavioral specialist. Administration would be made aware of it. We would talk with them. I would have conference with my assistant principals and principals, see how we could step in there, maybe a SAP team referral, which is a student assistance program. That way we can put in place some interventions. That way all these other ways can start so that the child doesn't need to come to me. I don't want to charge a student, but if there's an act of violence, drugs, or weapons in the school, I'm not going to let that go. I have to do my job at some point, but I would rather have all these other things go through, the channels properly first before they get to me.
Thank you. So, as we said, we kind of focused in on the truancy side of things for Crystal, and what would that look like for our own students here, especially in the Erie County and in the Erie Public School District. So what I'd like to do is then kind of open that up. We definitely have some the criminal justice side of things with law enforcement. What would be, looking at the fact that Crystal resisted an arrest, I'd like to ask Mr. Fox, can you talk to us a little bit about that aspect, and what would be your normal procedure from your Department of Juvenile Probation if you had someone like Crystal?
First, I'd like to say thank you for inviting me to this forum. Happy to be here to try to answer some of these questions. If a girl like Crystal was charged with a disorderly conduct misdemeanor, the police department, whether the school or the city, would file a written allegation with my department. And we would bring the client in and have an intake interview and try to find out whether they're going to admit or deny the charge and go through some of those legal issues. But the truancy part of it, we wouldn't handle that as a primary charge. That would be the Office of Children and Youth. But we would handle the misdemeanor. And we have a plethora of diversion programs that we use to keep kids from being adjudicated delinquent and keeping them out of placement facilities. I literally have a laundry list of things that I could just go through. But our basic focus on kids is to make them better citizens on the way out of our system than when they came in. And we start off with doing an assessment, a youth level of service assessment, to find out what their needs are, address those needs. We have a lot of clients, just like Crystal here. She has I don't think it's said in the film, but in the first part of the video, she admits that she has bipolar disorder and I think depression or something. I forget the other one. ADHD. Every supervisor every Wednesday meets with a group of people in a meeting we call triage. We bring clients to the attention of two mental health specialists from Erie County Care Management. We determine whether or not they need to be seen by those people. They do an assessment. If those people think that, oh, the family would benefit from functional family therapy, multisystemic therapy, whatever it is, we get those kids services. I know we sometimes get a bad rap for wanting to lock kids up and stuff. I'm a statistics guy. I could talk to death about statistics. We have very few kids who come through our system that, I don't want to say can't be helped, but very few kids go further and further into the system than most people think. 85% of our kids commit a crime, get involved in our system, don't come back into our system after their case is closed, and don't get into the adult system for at least the first 2 years of their adult life. So I think that's pretty good. And most of the kids that come into our system are low-level offenders. 45% of our kids come in, they're self-correcting. Crystal, I don't think she's necessarily self-correcting based on some of the things that she's doing, but she would probably be a moderate offender for us. Those kids are easily helped. We have a lot of good probation officers in my office. You have to like kids to do my job, and I couldn't do it for 23 years if I didn't love kids and see the potential that the kids have. And we have a lot of staff in our office, young people who are just the same way as I am. And I have no doubt in my mind that we could help a girl like Crystal.
Thank you. Mr. Titus, I'd like to ask you, can you talk to us a little bit about what would you see from OCY's perspective? Like, I mean, I guess you could kind of have both lenses because you have the school board, you have the OCY. So talk about maybe the truancy, and then how would you get involved from the OCY's perspective?
So the first hat that I'll put on is the OCY hat. What we would typically do is, what people I don't think most people are aware of, is that when the school code was updated, so was the Child Protective Services law. A lot of things came through in 2016. So what happens is once that improvement plan fails, the school is required by law to make a referral to OCY. And so I know a lot of families get very frustrated, but the school is required, or else they are then held accountable for omission. Meaning that they omitted to report, and they're mandated reporters, so they legally have to. So at the OCY point, we have a truancy department that would try to intervene, and they've worked very closely with Sue and with Bea and the other members at the school to try to kind of insert various services or whatever is going on with the kiddo or the family or the system around them to not have them to come all the way into the OCY system. So if that's not successful at the Office of Children and Youth, what we're looking at then is the whole system. So we're coming in, we're assessing child safety, we're assessing any risk factors that might be in place. What I'm not saying is I'm not saying that we are looking directly at the parents, because I think oftentimes there's many barriers in place for the family due to various systems, and I won't go on that soapbox right now, but various systems that are designed to help that often don't help but hinder. And so what our goal is to try to break down some of those barriers so that we can empower the family to not need us anymore. Essentially, our job is to put ourselves out of a job. Wouldn't that be great? And so from the OCY perspective, we will follow it through. It might rise to the level of where JPO, we will work in tandem on cases, and sometimes we'll have a youth who will become adjudicated dependent, meaning that the charges didn't go through, but they're still out of the parent's control. And so we have to put them under order because now we can help the parents make this kid do what they need to do, or they might be adjudicated delinquent. And that's where we will, JPO will often take the lead there in those cases. And that's where they maybe are more violent or aggressive, and the charges are not so much mental health oriented or barriers over here. And so that's when that system, and we'll work in tandem with that. From the OCY perspective, it really is trying to change whatever system dynamics are in place so that we don't have to, so that family can operate without us. From the school board perspective, I work as like the community liaison. So I'm really trying to reach out to families and work with them to figure out what is going on. Because again, as I had mentioned before, sometimes my roles really conflict with each other. So being on OCY, I know I'm not always somebody that people are super excited to see. I get that. I'm okay with that. You know, I've got good self-esteem. And I'm funny, so it's okay to laugh at some things. But all right, never mind. But so if we go back to the school board part of it, I'm trying to work with the families to see maybe there's a misunderstanding that's going on. I'm not naive to systemic discrimination that's in place. And so I really try to get in and advocate with the families, for the families on that end of things, which can be very different than the role that I serve at OCY, where I'm in the management spot. I also have a private practice. So I'm working with kids on the therapeutic level. That's my favorite role, is when I can get in and work with the kids and help the parents or whoever, the guardians or the family members or whatever's going on at school, help the kids really understand and develop better coping skills. Because I think that's what needs to occur. Is so often there's too many systems in place, and sometimes we're missing the small details that we really need to be able to adapt for these kids. So I think I've covered all three of my hats.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you. So now we want to take it a little further. So the second question that we have would be this. How would the procedure vary if Crystal committed a more flagrant offense? So now we're talking a felony such as a higher level felony or continuous bullying, selling illegal drugs, disorderly conducts. Let's talk a little bit about that now. So let's focus our intent on Crystal and the more flagrant offense. So what I'd like to do is let's kind of start off, and I don't want you guys to feel like you have to be called upon. If you feel like you want to speak up, feel free to. But let's start off with the more flagrant offense with Mr. Rude.
Well, for me, the procedure kind of remains the same for the first. I got to look at all aspects, the totality of the circumstances, what led up to this, what happened during, and what's going to happen after. As far as my role with the more flagrant offense, since we're I wouldn't say privatized police department, but we're our own little entity. We're totally separate from Chief Spizzarni's office. A lot of people may not realize that, but we're totally separate. We're our own entity. So felony cases, they're pretty big. They're a big deal. So at that time, I'd probably contact my sergeant or my chief, have them contact Chief Spizzarni's office. 9 times out of 10, they're going to let us handle it. And at that time, I'm going to contact ADA Brian Korwicki's office. The reason I do that, I want some guidance on what his office thinks is the appropriate level for me to go after, because any juvenile charged with a felony, that's a big deal. It can affect them later in life, not only high school, college, and then in the real world. Usually what I deal with are citations, which are summary offense, which are essentially tickets, and from that, as Judge Mack can attest to, there's diversion programs in place, which is community service plus counseling. Usually the charge will get dropped at that point upon completion. So my role for this question is I got to look into every aspect of what's going on. If there's drugs in the kid's locker, now there's laws in Pennsylvania in place that, you know, we're allowed in the buildings to search lockers at any given time if we have reasonable suspicion. So if we walk by a locker and I smell what I believe to be marijuana, I can search it. So if that's, I look in the locker, find the kid's name, it's pretty cut and dry at that point, and at that time it's not a felony. It's just a misdemeanor possession charge. But I'll still contact Brian Korwicki's office. As far as felonies, I'll contact their office as well, get some guidance on what they would like me to do, and then I can go from there based on their permission.
Thank you. Chief Spizzarni, so, you know, Mr. Root just alluded to the fact that you're definitely separate entities. He represents a, you know, school-based police department, and then you have your own, you know, City of Erie. So talk to us a little bit about, like, what involvement would the City of Erie Police Department have when it comes to a student like Crystal that's showing a much, a more higher flagrant offense?
Well, like you said, if it involves this on school property or under their jurisdiction, and it's something that might be more serious when generally they don't handle that, we would. But being that it's in the school property, and if they have all the information or conduct the investigation, it's within the school boundaries, then they handle it. If it's something that happens outside the school district and on the streets in the neighborhood or something, then it's something that we handle. And again, it all comes down to if there is a criminal offense, we file an allegation to juvenile probation, and they're not taken to jail. They may come down to the station and be held there until the processing is done, but within 6 hours, a family member must be contacted, come down, and they take custody of the child, unless it's an extremely violent crime, at which time they'll be detained. But 95% of juvenile crime, the juvenile is released to the parent or a guardian, and then the paper is eventually filed with juvenile probation, and it goes back to probation starting the process.
So with that said, Mr. Fox, did you have anything else that you wanted to add in terms, I mean, I know you've shared a little bit about what you do, but what would you do then for this? So you get this flagrant offense, if it made its way up to Chief Spizzarni level, but then, you know, the student comes back to you, what do you do now for this student at this point?
Well, based on the charges that you talked about, we basically wouldn't handle that any different than what I described earlier. Those things would not normally be detainable offenses. We go through a lengthy another assessment tool, the Pennsylvania Detention Assessment Tool, to determine whether or not a client should be placed into custody. And as the chief said, not very many kids get put into custody, although some people have perceptions that they do. They really don't. So we would basically handle it the same. We deal with individuals, and we treat them as such. Every kid has their own set of needs, and we try to address those. So I think based on what I said earlier, our office would handle it the same way. We would receive the written allegation from the police department. The district attorney's office would approve or deny the charges. And then we just start like we normally do, like I said earlier.
Thank you. Mrs. Zaberski, in terms of the school district and use it in that, at that higher level district administration decision-making, what would we do? What procedure would apply to Crystal if there was that higher offense in the school?
So if Crystal was if it was a safety issue of assault or weapons or drugs, then typically our administration would suspend the student until they were able to get all of the information together. And then if it was that intensive of an offense, then it would go into an expulsion. And with an expulsion, it would be an actual expulsion hearing where the parents would come with the student. We would have a board member that would be there, and we would share all the evidence. And if we have enough evidence for expulsion, then we look at what other options we have. And I would say over the past 3 years, we've been really looking at what are our options for students. What can we do to make a student want to be in school, want to succeed, and what is their pathway? And though we had the crisis with a budget, as we were doing that piece, we were losing some of the electives that students would have. They didn't have opportunities for a lot of art, music, and gym, or opportunities for family and consumer science and business and computers and STEM. So one of the things we've been doing in the city is we've been giving our middle schools and our high schools opportunities to find pathways. So if a student is expelled and they go to the expulsion hearing and we expel them, we have a cyber program, we have a recovery program, we have an alternative education program, and we're trying to, again, very similar to what Mr. Fox said, therapeutic to support, because when we see Crystal, when we saw, number one, she had truancy issues. She didn't want to go to school. But we also know that she had some mental health issues that needed to be addressed. So when we look at the life of a Crystal, we look at Crystal from this piece. So we talk about student assistance programs. We talk about community schools and how that fits in. We're trying to be very proactive to support our students in their lives as individuals, very similar to what Mr. Fox had said. So though that student is expelled, we want to make sure that they may be expelled for an issue that has occurred with the safety of all of the students involved, but then we do not want that child not to succeed. And so our goal is to get them some mentorships, to get them to find what their passion is and give them a chance to do that. And if you wouldn't mind, I just wanted to share a few people that are out here that are really supportive of our schools and in our schools. Brother Daryl is here. I know he's here. He has worked tremendously over the past 8 years working with our students. This past year, he was working with the truancy side of it. So any of all of our 16 schools, if we had families that were having some truancy and attendance issues, our teams were going out to their homes and talking with them to say, this is what it means to be not in school. This is how we can avoid going to the district justices, sharing some proactive things. We have so many different organizations that are here today also to share some of the things that they've done. For our community schools, we have Megan Easter from Piper Burley, who is a community school director who works tirelessly with our school and our family. We have a wide variety of administrators I saw come in, and they're here because they too care about our students and want to make a difference in their lives, as well as family services. I saw Bethesda, I saw the Achievement Center, and I know Mr. Nixon is going to share some of that. We are very blessed to have all these people to support our schools and our students. And out of as the role of the assistant superintendent, nothing that we do in the Erie School District could be happening without the community, without the people I'm sharing. I know I saw James Sherrod from the Martin Luther King Center, and I'm sure there's more. These lights are hard, so I can't really see everybody out here. But I thank you for your efforts for our students, because we are a really good district, and we have wonderful children, and we have wonderful families.
Thank you. So, and you kind of just took that segue, and I appreciate that. So we just want to kind of introduce some of those key audience members. Mr. Bursky already mentioned Brother D, or also Daryl Craig of the Blue Coats. We have Andrea Glostein, she's assistant principal at Strong Vincent Middle School. Megan Easter, who was mentioned, she's also involved in our Equity Inclusion, as well as our Equity Inclusion Committee, as well as our Strategic Plans Goal 4 team, which is focusing on equity, fairness, and justice. We have Latasha Phillips that's with us tonight. She's a student assistance program counselor at Erie High School, also mental health specialist. Amy Helmer, who's the director of community programs, also a psychotherapist with Bethesda Lutheran Services at Trinity Center. And then Arnisha Naylor, she's our truancy officer for the Edison and East schools through Bethesda. So we have some of these key audience members, and why it's important, why we mentioned them, is because we're going to ask this last and final question, and then we're going to have our guest speaker come up and then get to the open platform for Q&A. So the last question that I have, and feel free, key audience members, please, there's 2 mics right here in the aisle, but all of my panelists and key audience members, I'm going to open this up a little bit. So let's talk specifically about, like, what are we doing to divert our youth in Erie to get them off of this path into the school to prison pipeline. So let's talk specifically about services that are layered in our community. So the question that I'm just going to ask you would be, what programs and services that do we have or are tied into your specific organization or departments, and how are we using them, and how effective are they? So we'll just kind of roundabout get through everybody. I think I'll start with Tyler Titus. Why don't you start us off, and we'll roll through.
Sure. So at OCY, we don't house any of the services ourselves, but we refer out to a lot of places. We're using the Achievement Center, we're using family services, we're using visitation coaches, we're using our trauma therapies, we're using, Safe Harbor Behavioral Health. We're tapping into the SAP programs at the schools. Really, we have people that go in, will help families if there's transportation issues, if they're missing for medical appointments, if there's daycare issues, and some of the kids are having to stay back because both parents are working and the hours are weird. So we're helping them get special purchase daycare, and then helping those kids get to those programs. We're buying Y memberships to help our kids. Maybe there's bullying issues going on, so then we're trying to get stuff in place for them in that route. So, at OCY, we're really trying, whatever we identify as that need or what the family is identifying, what services can we use in the community to really get in there and kind of like overcome that barrier.
Thank you. And I didn't mention this, but please keep your responses at a minute or less. But Megan Easter, would you mind coming up? And what Ms. Titus has mentioned about the community, I'd like to tie her in. Again, she's a community schools director. She works at a Piper Burley. And just kind of talk a little bit, about what is it that you do when we're trying to build our community schools model.
Okay, thank you. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here tonight. And by any means, I don't have all the answers, and I don't want to pretend like I'm going to stand up here with a microphone and answer in terms of our families or our administration. But community schools, I guess, is an initiative. So it's not just one person available at the school level, but we really want to tap into asking our families and asking the staff and asking the community about what it is that, and Tyler had mentioned it, what systems that we have created maybe that aren't meeting the needs of our families, and what we can do on an individual level, working with the families, but also systemically as a school, what we can do to better reach our families. So sometimes that is going, door to door. If families aren't coming in, I will do home visits. We'll go to the house. If there's barriers to getting medical treatment, I will figure out how we could either get the students there myself in my own car, we can pay for transportation. What are those barriers? So I don't think it's as easy as one answer, right, when we're talking about barriers to student success, but it really is building those relationships with families, asking them questions in a non-judgmental way, wanting to help our families. A lot of times we've had families ask us questions now where it's not just reactive, we're not just calling when attendance is a problem, but we've started to notice parents calling us to say, hey, in a month I'm going to have my third baby and it's going to be really hard for me to walk my student to school. What can you do to help? So we've seen some of those relationships grow, and it's just kind of organic, and I think a lot of it is we're there to support our students. Like I get to say, we're not perfect all the time. I'm the first to own up to any mistakes that we make, but I think it's just about building those relationships where families feel comfortable talking to us, and we're able to help in a different type of way that maybe we didn't have the resources in the past.
Thank you.
So I don't know if that answers it.
Yeah, no, that's
Okay.
good. I just want to give the audience, and I want to give this is videotape. I want to give people the insight of like what is community school models and what are some of the ways that we do and what do we provide.
And I think to tap into that as well, it's to bring in the services into the school. So, we have our lead partners, Family Services, and we have a truancy prevention program that we offer parent workshops on site. There's a case management component that they will do home visits as well. We offer after-school programming. We have a mobile dentist program, so we are actually able to provide cleanings and restorative care for students so that they're not missing school if they have abscessed teeth or there's an infection. We are also able to, we just started Big Brothers Big Sisters mentoring program where students are able to enroll and have a big brother at school. We haven't been able to fulfill all the needs, but it's constantly looking at the data and how we can shift and continue to get better to better supporting our students and our families.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, it's grant funded, community funds. It is a United Way initiative. It's a 3-year grant, so we're coming up on how to keep the position sustainable. But it really is about building partnerships within the community. Like I said, I'm one person. We can't do it alone, so it's about bridging and building partnerships and bringing those awesome programs and services into the school so we can sustain it long term, so we can have the funds going. And that even if I like to think about it, even if I weren't to have a job tomorrow, would the programs and services be able to continue? So the idea behind it is supposed to be a self-sufficient model in the long run. We're in year 2, so we're still kind of getting through the kinks of things. But ultimately, the goal would be that community resources and partnerships can support the families in the neighborhood.
Thank you.
And Mr. Nixon, there are some flyers in the back that explains the community school model, and it also shares the schools and the lead partners in it. And there's another form also that looks like this that is out there. And there's one other thing which is a telephone, and it has 211. And I think it's important for everyone to realize that one of the things United Way did do was to have this number, 211. So if someone has lost their job and they don't know where to go, they don't know how to do unemployment or workers' compensation or any kind of questions that you have, it's the 211 that will be able to direct you somewhere. So there's some of these. It's an easy reminder to anyone, and that goes a long way so that if you needed some additional supports. And then they also offer the free tax preparation. With tax season coming, there is some information there as well.
Thank you. One aspect of the video that I just wanted to kind of talk about briefly was, you know, we see there's concerns around Crystal with ADHD and bipolar. And, you know, I'm born and raised in Erie, and I know conversations that I've had with other people from Erie. And we start to talk about, you know, thinking about black males specifically, and how we know that the data shows that black males fill up a majority of the prisons, and they make up majority of the suspension data in a lot of our public schools. And I think one area that I appreciate and I see is that they're talking about the mental health aspect, because I know that's one area that, you know, when we have conversations, we talk about that aspect and how critical that could be to the black community, and not just black community, but how critical it is to us as a people in general. But I think it's a topic that needs to be discussed and talked a little bit more about. So I know Titus talked a little bit about OCY side of it, but Latasha, Ms. Phillips, would you mind coming up and talking about this? She represents our student assistance program, which directly works with our students that are in need, especially in the area of mental health. So would you mind sharing out a little bit about, just, I guess, you know, within a minute, of what student assistance does for our students?
Student assistance program from the mental health aspect is we do exactly what they would do in the outpatient services inside the school, in addition to connecting them with outside services. So any one of my students have access to me every single day. Granted, usually I see them for 1 hour, but it's not placed in that barrier of I only see them once a week. So if I'm having a student who has anxiety and their anxiety is high this week, I have some frequent flyers that need to see me that week, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, and that's okay. And again, I still always connect to outside patient because they do need those resources. For someone like Crystal, I would connect her with some extracurriculars. So we have the Downtown Y, which is a free program for all of our Erie City residents, which most people don't know about, and it's a positive outlet. And I think that talks a lot about what Ms. B said, finding their path, because they all have something, some gift that they want to give, and they need to learn how to develop it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, no, there's a staff. So we have it's called a student assistance program, and the student assistance program is actually at all of our middle and high schools. Excuse me. And then what they do is any elementary building, they have on-call supervisors. So there's, like, for example, Latasha would service, I don't know, maybe Jefferson and, you know, Jefferson and Lincoln, I'm just saying. We also have behavior intervention specialists, which were mentioned, and that's supported to us through family services. And we do have behavior intervention specialists in almost all of our buildings. But I didn't want to pass by. We started talking about community involvement, and I know a lot of us mentioned some services, and just wanted to, the Bethesda is Amy Helmer or Arnasia Naylor. Are you here? I'm sorry if I said your name wrong. I apologize. Would either one of you, it doesn't matter, would you mind speaking up on Bethesda and kind of the work you've done to help with truancy? Sorry, Ms. Naylor, I said your name wrong. I tried.
Well, my job I work for Easton Edison, is to kind of connect with the students as well as the parents to get them to actually come into the school or call the school, letting them know that, you know, I'm the middleman between them and the school and letting them know that it's all right to not know what to do or to have a wayward child and not know which way to go, because as soon as you mention OCY, everybody goes running. And just to be able to explain to them, like, you know, the services that they can provide and the things that they can help with. The hardest thing is to get the parents to answer the phone or the door. So I think, well, my latest approach has been to try to get to know the kids, because, you know, when you meet somebody cool that you're interested in, then you bring that home. Like, oh, hey, well, I met Miss Arnisha today, and, you know, she asked me how my day was going. I have one particular girl that keeps sticking in my brain because she hasn't been in school for a couple of days, and then when she actually comes, I'm the first person she looks for, and my hours are limited here, like between East and Edison. So she's like, I haven't seen you in 2 days. Oh, well, I didn't know you were here for 2 days. But, you know, just getting them to come to you with problems, and when they're having a bad day, to be able to say, you know, I just need 5 minutes of your time, like, so that you build a positive relationship in school, and it's not just someone, you know, a teacher or a counselor, but hey, you can come to me if you're having a bad day, and if you don't feel like talking to the counselor, then I can get you connected to the principal, or you got a friend here. Because I remember being in 7th grade, and you get clouded by all the wrong people, and teachers seem too, you know, big, and counselors seem like they're too much, but just somebody that's willing to say, did you have a good day today? Or, you know, what's going on at home? Or how's your mom? Or I seen her at work the other day. Just being able to connect with them, and then getting the parents to open up and do the same. So far so good, but.
Thank you.
And just in connection with that, the 2-hour education program that Dr. Habursky alluded to earlier, the education program, the first part is talking about the law, and that's the presentation that I do. The second presentation is done by Ms. Naylor, and she talks a little bit about why students are truant and those types of things, and then actually talks about what is an excused absence and what is not an excused absence. And it's amazing, the interaction with the parents to say, I never realized that was an illegal day. And so that information has been very beneficial to the parents and to the students. Then the third part of that presentation is meeting some of the social service providers. So representatives from Family Services, from the Caring Place, from the Boys and Girls Club, they come to these education programs and connect with the parents. So it's another opportunity for parents to see what is out there and actually connect a service with the person.
Thank you.
You had some more? Okay, thank you. So we're kind of moving through. We talked a little bit about community, talked about a little about truancy, and kind of relate back to mental health. Is there anybody else other than the panelists that wanted to share out regarding any services or anything that you haven't got a chance to speak to? Chief Spizzarni?
I guess in the past, the police department would be pretty silent here, what kind of programs we have for youth and stuff, but things have improved and changed. We collaborate much more with other agencies. But on the police department side, the PAL League was created, the Police Athletic League. And it's not just about athletics, it's about officers getting to meet the kids, work with them after school in an informal setting, as far as, you know, maybe helping with a little homework and then doing some games and stuff that builds a relationship between the police officer and the child. Some of these children will see officers at their houses for calls, and it kind of puts them at ease. It's somebody they know, somebody they've built a relationship with, and it makes them more comfortable. It brings the police down to a level that these young children can deal with. The PAL League's currently in 7 of the elementary schools in the district. We also partner at the high school with the protective services class. We have a couple officers that are now involved in going to the high school. These are kids that are signed up to learn about being emergency medical technicians, firemen, or policemen. Doesn't mean they're going to be, but they're interested in it. So our officers are now going to the high school, going to those classes and helping with some of that. More formalized programs in development. We're also very active with Unified Erie. Unified Erie deals with all these agencies you've heard about that are involved in supporting members of the community. So the police department not only responds to those 911 calls, but we're trying to do other things. And I think I'm glad Bea brought up the 211 for United Way. All those social services agencies are available through 211. And I think that as that message gets out to more people, we'll see a decrease in calls to the police department because they'll be calling 211 and being connected directly to the services so that it doesn't become the policeman has to wear 50 hats on every call because they have to help people with things that are outside our expertise.
Thank you. Any other final words from any of the panel?
I'd like
Yep,
to say
Mr. Fox?
something. To try to keep it short, what Tyler mentioned about all those services and everything, we do the same thing. Any barriers that are stopping our kids from getting services, we do it. We're social workers with a badge, so we have to do those things. But a couple things that I just wanted to touch on real quick are some things that people don't always know about. President Judge John Trisilla allows my office a lot of latitude when it comes to programming and whatnot. One of the things that I'm heavily involved in is school-based probation. We have probation officers in the schools who do not carry caseloads so that they can be with the kids, be involved in the SAP teams. And I think some of them actually feel that they're part of the school district. They've been around for a long time. And I really think they are too sometimes. They work during lunch times and whatnot. But we have programs where if a kid needs some sneakers to play basketball or cleats to play football, or they can't pay the fee to play football or whatever, little gritters, we pay that fee. Kids who owe restitution, we have job programs that do that. One of the great things I get to do is I get to run a garden, a greenhouse. Who doesn't want to work and get dirty during the day with kids by your side and teaching them competencies about planting vegetables and stuff like that, and donating the food to the Second Harvest Food Bank and taking food home if they need the food. I'm a carpenter kind of guy, so we do carpentry projects. Someone needs a cornhole game. We make cornhole games. We actually rent some space from Bethesda Children's Home. We have a garage where we have lawn care equipment, woodworking tools, fishing equipment, golfing. I mean, if there's something a kid wants to do, we'll figure out a way to do it. And like I said, our whole goal is to make these kids successful. And if people are having bad experiences with their child or their relative, if they don't think they're getting the service that they think they should get, they need to get a hold of our department. It may be that, hey, maybe we can't help because of what their behavior is, but we do want to help people. So I could talk forever, but,
I mean, and I think everybody here could, and I'm sure there's people in the audience as well that I didn't even mention that could definitely elaborate. So I want to be respectful of your time. I know we have slated to get in the Q&A at 8. We're a little bit over, so I appreciate everybody else being here. Brother D, Andrea, thank you for taking your time. I'm going to move forward, though, and I'm going to get to our guest speaker. So I'd like to intro in Nikki Page. Nikki Page is a trial lawyer with 12 years' experience handling both criminal and civil matters. She earned her BA in English and Political Science from Wellesley College and her JD from St. John's University in Queens, New York. Before moving to Erie, Attorney Page was a senior prosecutor for the New York City Civilian Complaint Review Board, where she investigated complaints of police misconduct and successfully prosecuted NYPD officers facing disciplinary charges for misconduct, including the excessive use of force, offensive language, and abuse of authority. In that capacity, Nikki secured the first guilty verdict in more than 20 years for an officer accused of conducting a prohibited chokehold during an arrest. Currently, Nikki is of counsel at the firm of Malaragno, Placidy, and Perini, where she specializes in criminal defense and family law. She is also an inspirational influencer and a board-certified life coach who focuses on assisting women with living their best life. Without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Nikki Page.
Good evening, everybody. I didn't put it in my bio, but I guess I should also say that I am born and raised in Erie, Pennsylvania. This is the neighborhood that I grew up in. I am a 16503 girl. I grew up on 8th Street between Parade and German, and had my mom allowed me to go to public school, this would have been my high school. But alas, Mercyhurst Prep. class of 97. So I was asked to talk a little bit about the Juvenile Justice Reform Act of 2018, which I will do. But as I told the gentleman who asked me to speak about this, it's a federal law, and when it comes to criminal law, typically criminal law is handled by the states, and for the most part, the cases like the one you saw in the video or what goes on here at East High or any other school in the district won't really be impacted that much by federal law. Like U.S. attorneys won't be involved, the Justice Department won't be involved. So I'll talk about it because there's some good information in there, but then I also took the liberty to add in some extra notes based on my own experience and some other things that I think we must talk about if we're going to have an intellectually honest conversation about the school-to-prison pipeline and ways in which we all may be participating in it and things that we could possibly be doing to dismantle it. So with regard to the Juvenile Justice Reform Act of 2018, it really is a reauthorization of a law that already existed. The Juvenile Justice Delinquency Prevention Act was first signed into law by President Ford in 1974, and it was last reauthorized in 2002, but it had expired in 2007, so there had been almost about a 10-year lapse when this law was not in effect. When it was first authorized in the 70s, it was aimed at ensuring that the states met a common minimum standard of how they deal with juveniles involved in the criminal justice system. And at that time in the 70s, its two main protections were, number one, prohibiting the incarceration of youth who had been charged with what they called status offenses. Now, status offenses are offenses that aren't technically crimes. It would be things that if these children were over 18, they wouldn't even be a bad thing. Things such as in cities where there have curfew ordinances, staying out past curfew, or we talked about truancy, not showing up for school. Things that otherwise aren't really criminal, but because of them being children, they're not supposed to do it. So they passed a law saying you can't imprison children for being out past curfew. And the second protection is what they called sight and sound separation from adults. If a child did need to be placed in a prison, they had to be placed separately where they could not see or hear adults. They had to be in a separate facility. The updates to this law based on the reauthorization that just happened a couple weeks ago in December of 2018, some of the new things are a focus on what they're calling racial and ethnic disparities. Code Red is kind of what they're calling it. And it requires the states to collect and analyze data on racial and ethnic disparities, as well as establish plans to address those disparities. Number two, with regard to sight and sound separation, it has added that if a child is being detained and being held as an adult, even though that child's charges are adult charges, they still need to be kept separate from adults. Third, there is a rule that if you are incarcerated, and this was a rule that was in the original one, if you were being held for truancy, you typically couldn't be held for more than 7 days unless it was pursuant to court order that you violated by not going to school. Now, even if there is a court order, you still shouldn't be held in a detention facility for more than 7 days unless a judge articulates in an order the factual basis for you needing to be held in that facility and a finding that there is no less restrictive alternative for you being in a facility. For someone like the woman in the video, there may be an articulation that based on, her special needs because of her mental health condition, that there is no less restrictive place to hold her, but barring that, you still should be released as a child in no more than 7 days incarceration. The new issuance of this law also creates a data-driven, evidence-based, and trauma-responsive prevention program because it recognizes that most children who come in contact with the criminal justice system for whatever reason, an overwhelming majority of them report that they have had some level of prior trauma, whether that be child abuse, sex abuse, homelessness, hunger, all sorts of things. And I would see that on a daily basis as a district attorney, that we kind of have to bring compassion into the system and understand that this person may be behaving this way because they are PTSD. They're suffering from some form of trauma. So we don't want to then re-traumatize people. So that's something that's been built into the law. It also clarifies who can sit on state agencies, the State Advisory Committee, and this is a committee that kind of like oversees the implementation of the act, and they now are requiring mental health professionals be on the advisory committee, as well as people who are representatives of victim-based and witness-based agencies, as well as in areas, if you live in a part of the country where there's at least 2 Native American tribes, you have to have a representative from Indian or tribal affairs on these committees too. So there's like a kind of desire to have a more representative presence on the advisory committee implementing this law. So that's the Juvenile Justice Reform Act of 2018. Now what I really came to say. The school to prison pipeline, and when we got the welcome, it was spoken about that it really began in the 90s with stationing actual police officers in schools and kind of criminalizing everyday adolescent behavior, these zero tolerance policies, which as someone who works in the law, I'm pretty sure you can agree that it's very rare that there aren't either aggravating or mitigating circumstances in any case involving the law. It's very rare that things are just cookie cutter, every fact is exact the same, that you can just plug a different person into each situation. So zero tolerance policies typically don't give you the leeway to kind of take into consideration some of the differences or some of the mitigating factors that may be present in any given situation. Studies have shown, in my own personal experience, in having cases where children were involved, or assault cases that happen on school grounds in New York City, there are cameras everywhere, so there's lots of video of these things that happen. Typically, my experience is that police involvement in the situation actually exacerbates and escalates the situation. Something that starts out as just normal adolescent behavior, 2 boys pushing each other in the cafeteria, NYPD shows up and it turns into a melee because they pull out their pepper sprays, someone pulls out their taser, they're pointing tasers in people's face, and kids start screaming, running, and it turns into like, this totally didn't need to be this. And so studies are showing that police involvement in these type of lower level issues actually make it worse, not better. And it also, studies are showing that a lot of these things are really, when I say low level, they're really things that are not criminal behavior. For instance, there are people who end up being arrested because they weren't wearing their student ID on school grounds, so they are determined to be trespassing even though they actually are a student at that school. Here in Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia, a famous rapper, Meek Mill, just got out of prison last year. He has like a #1 rap album, but his introduction into the criminal justice system was he was suspended from school. He was afraid to tell his mother that he had gotten suspended, so he woke up and went to school anyway, and he was arrested for trespassing on school grounds even though he was a student at that school, and that was his introduction to the criminal justice system. And I would just say, as a community, we have to think, like, does that make sense to arrest someone for going to school? Is there a better way to handle that other than the zero tolerance? If you're suspended, you can't be on school grounds. I personally had a case in New York City where a person was, again, arrested for trespass because he was leaning on the outside of a school fence. Now, he's not on school grounds. He's on New York City public sidewalk waiting at a bus stop. The bus sign is right there. He's on the corner, but there's a school behind him, and he was leaning on the fence, the playground fence, and the police officer said he was trespassing on school grounds because his shoulder was touching the fence. He was arrested, processed, taken to Rikers because his shoulder was on a fence. I mean, I won that case, just saying. So one of the main things that I think we need to talk about that hasn't, oh, am I pushing buttons? I am. One of the main things that I think we need to talk about is the role that implicit bias plays in the school to prison pipeline. Basically, implicit bias influences how we act on a subconscious level. Even if in our conscious thinking, waking moments, we renounce prejudices and stereotypes in our daily lives, we have been bombarded with so much messaging about one another that we all have implicit biases. And basically what it means is we typically tend to favor our own in-group, and that would be the social group to which we psychologically identify as belonging with. Okay, so let's keep it real. White people identify with white people, black people identify with black people, women identify with women, men identify with men. And those subconscious biases affect how we move in the world. In March of 2014, under President Obama, the Justice Department Office of Civil Rights published data and statistics about school discipline. And it showed that although nationally black students only represent 18% of school-going population in preschool, 18% of preschool, they represent 48% of out-of-school suspensions in preschool. I don't even know when we started suspending kids from preschool at all. That wasn't a thing when I was in preschool, but it's a thing. Their white counterparts represent 43% of the preschool population nationally, but only 26% of out-of-school suspensions. Black students are suspended and expelled 3 times more than their white counterparts. And over 70% of school children who are referred to law enforcement for school-related incidents are Black and Latino. And so implicit bias in how we think about each other is affecting how discipline is imposed, who's singled out for discipline, as well as the severity of the discipline that is imposed. And it really does have an impact on children and on the school. And I think as a school district, as citizens, as taxpayers, that's something that we all have to be accountable for that. We have to be courageous enough to look inside and see where that implicit bias lies in us and take the steps to learn how to unlearn some of the things that we have learned via television, music, news, over however many years we've been alive, we've been bombarded with stereotypes about one another. In New York City, implicit bias training is mandatory and it is annual. Every police officer has to take it. I had to take it, and it illuminated some things about myself. And I don't know what the policies are here in Erie, Pennsylvania, but I would highly recommend mandatory annual implicit bias training, especially in a school district where the majority of the students are Black and brown, and the overwhelming majority of staff, teachers, and administrators are white. And I guess I'm coming to the end. I'm gonna sit down, but I also want to say from a legal perspective, the American Bar Association has also spoken out about implicit bias, and they have said that, again, Black children are disproportionately impacted in schools when, and this is a message that they sent out to attorneys who are hired to represent children and or parents who are having issues out of school. They're telling us as the legal community to keep an eye out for implicit bias and that it does, in fact, affect discipline in the schooling system. And their message was that we must make an explicit effort to confront implicit bias. And before I sit down, there's just one more thing I want to say. It's not about a policy or anything. It's just about the way our schools look. In New York City, people started looking around and seeing what schools look like, what that uniform looks like, what that physical structure of the school institution looked like. And when people looked with those eyes, they started to see that the school itself really kind of, sort of, maybe absolutely looked like a prison and was run like a prison. The uniform with the khaki pants and the shirt was akin to a prison uniform. They had a rule where students had to face forward, walk in a straight line, and there was a painted white line down the side of the hallway. And you had to be to the right of that white line, look straight forward, don't talk, walk in a straight line. That's prison policy. And And basically it was determined, and the school, it just looked, it was concrete. It didn't really look like a place that invited creativity and open exchange of ideas and questioning. It was a place that looked like it was designed to produce compliant prisoners, not creative, active children. And so that's another place where we need to look at what the surroundings look like and what that communicates to children who are in school. Are they in a place that is fostering learning and creativity and growth, or a place where they're just being taught how to follow commands? That's all I was asked to talk about, and a lot I wasn't asked to talk about, but I think it was very important. Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Okay, thank you very much. So for the last portion, I know we're kind of over a little bit. None of us are on a punch clock here, so I think everybody's okay. If you have a family commitment or have to leave, we understand. But what we're going to do is we're going to get into an open platform here for question answering. Our panelists will be here. We have our key audience members here to help facilitate some of that conversation. I just asked for to kind of lay out some norms before we go. The first norm I would ask of everyone who's coming up front to please be respectful and use appropriate language when speaking. Be patient and allow questions to be answered fully. And just to be open and honest with what you're trying to get across, because we definitely want people, it doesn't matter if you're for this, against this, we want to hear what you have to say. With that being said, there's mics at the end of the aisles, so I'm asking, it's first come, first serve, so whoever would like to get up, feel free to step up. All right. We'll go one at a time, Art.
Yes,
Gentlemen?
hello, my name is Jason Brendel, and I would like to thank the panelists, and I would like to thank every organization doing this. And first, I want to say this. 25 years ago, I was at Governor Ridge's inauguration. 25 years ago on this week. I walked the schools of East High School. I was bullied. I was bullied because I was gay. Now, I have here, and I want to read this. This is going to go for my question. It says, self-regulation allows us to be good citizens and to follow social norms. It also allows us to plan for the future and to be rational. Social rejection apparently reduces people to desire to do both. Now, what I'm basically trying to say is we have these two words, social inclusion and social exclusion. And I would like to thank and turning Nikki Page for those two words, those two powerful words that you said. That is exactly why I've been standing up for everyone to talk about this. When us adults reject everyone, our behavior is mirrored in our kids. So when we have individuals that reject us and socially exclude us because of who we are, we get bullied. And you're in the Erie School District performance fact, the third party that you had come look at the school district said that 9% are being bullied last year. And
I'm sorry,
and
Jason.
my question is just,
thank you.
The pipeline could stop if we stop socially excluding individuals because of their behavior and to become better role models. How can we do that, and how can we become better role models to these students that need the help?
Does anybody like to speak to that?
Is that okay? If I jump in?
Absolutely.
So thank you, Jason, for that. I would just like to say, so when I ran for the school board, I had a perception on the outside. I did have a perception, and I perceived that there was not a lot being done. And that was a big part of why I ran, is I was really feeling that people were being isolated. I felt, especially akin to my LGBT community, and I really wanted to make sure that that there was nobody being excluded. And I'm not somebody, and if anybody's watched anything I've done, I'm very quick to point fingers of blame or to say, hey, like to a whistleblow almost. This is what's going on. I can honestly proudly say though that this school does really work very hard to set efforts for inclusion, especially with our LGBT students. You know, I'm a trans member and I'm on the school board and I was voted in by the community, so I think that speaks wonders for our community. But going back to the prison and pipeline effort, I would like to say we had talked about a million of the services that we have in place. But no one up here is saying that the system is perfect. We have a lot of work we got to do. And I think that everybody knows that, and that is why this forum is happening. And I think we are all aware that we have a lot of growth that we have to do and a lot of services that we would love to put in place. And so I don't think anyone up here will attest that, hey, we've got it down pat and that they're going to stand up here and defend it. We are often held in limitation by the own systems that are created that we have to work for, be it funding resources, be it elected officials who divvy out budgets. But I agree that there's more that needs to be done, but I did want to just kind of add into that piece.
Yep.
You know how to turn it on?
Oh, at the bottom, the very bottom, hold it down. Oh. Mary, could you bring the mic over to her, please? Real quick. We good? What we do without IT guys, you know? IT people.
Okay, so I address anything. I receive every referral that comes through the SAP team. It goes to me, and then I disperse it out. As far as bullying, when it comes to inclusion with LGBTQ, and I'm probably saying it wrong, so please forgive me, I don't see as much as it coming from peer to peer versus it coming from the outsider, so their family members. Most of my children who are gay or lesbian or trans, they're not really receiving too much bullying from their peers saying, oh, you're gay, or oh, you're this. In my faculty, they are not perfect. I am not perfect, but I will say this about Erie High School, that they are very inclusive. We have some workers, and I'm not trying to expel anybody, but we have employees who are gay and who can relate to them, and they're transparent. So they do hug them, they do embrace them, but getting our families on board, getting that generational curse that if you're gay, you're going to hell or something such of that nature, that's where we really need to address the bullying. And when it comes to that generation of the LGBTQ, sorry if I'm saying it wrong. So it is being addressed. It's not as what it is opposed to see. I know that when we grew up, I'm sure I'm probably in that same generation with Jason, not far behind, it was a taboo. It is not a taboo. Our generation now, they're showing so much openness. They embrace so much more that we couldn't embrace back in the day. And that's the beauty thing that I teach them to advocate for. So it is improving, even though it may not seem like it is.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Hi, my name is Bill Kuhar, and I'm the president of the Erie Education Association. I represent all of the teachers and pupil services employees of the Erie School District. And I believe tonight is a great opportunity to talk about education, and I think your guest speaker was a great example of how education can move people forward, and giving opportunities to all of our students and having those opportunities for enrichment for our kids that they're not getting. And how do we break this pipeline to you guys? I guess the question is, how do we show that, show our legislators that we do this work, we do work that's really important, and sometimes it's looked at as inefficient work because we're working with smaller and smaller groups of kids, but it's much more efficient than having them housed in the penal system in the long run. And we really need to work as a group instead of pointing fingers, hold hands and work together, so that way we can continue to grow our community and through education. So my question is, how do we show legislators how to do that and that we're doing our good work? Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody like to, go ahead.
I would like to just share a few things. Mr. Nixon is very humble as our facilitator, but part of his role is our equity and fairness officer, along with, he is spearheading goal 4 for the school district strategic plan. And we do have some of those in the back as well. But our strategic plan has 5 goals. 1 is early learning, 2 is service learning, 3 is major core courses, 4 is equity and fairness, and 5 is graduating every single student from Erie Public Schools. But implicit bias is absolutely one of the things that Mr. Nixon has taken on and led with our diversity committee, as well as we just had training in November for every teacher and every person in the Erie School District. So we are moving in that direction. We're not there. We have a lot of work to do. One of the goals that we have is looking at disparity and looking at discipline and the disparity in discipline. So that is there. The other thing is talking regarding the gentleman over here who had shared, number 1, the entire district is working towards positive school-wide support systems in every building. Restorative justice, where students are talking about situations that occur and how to be nice to one another. I was in a classroom the other day. It was 1st grade. So I would say to Mr. Rude, "Good morning, Mr. Rude, how are you today?" And he would say good morning back to me. Being nice to one another, caring about each other. So that's the tier 1 that we're talking about, and we want every student to be able to do that. But Mr. Nixon has done a fabulous job in doing the beginning stages. He has a lot of work to do, and we're all on board with him to continue that work.
Yeah. Thank you. I don't know if anybody I know, Ms. Are you ready to go? I don't know if anybody else had anything they wanted to share regarding legislatures.
I would just say be loud and be persistent. Annoy the crap out of our elected officials. You have to annoy them to get them to listen.
Point noted.
Okay, Johnny Johnson, yeah. Thank the panel for everything that you did. And I also want to thank Attorney Nikki Page for and I want to thank her because she talked about the elephant in the home, the elephant in the school, the elephant in the city, okay, which is implicit bias. Okay. One thing that I want to say personally, the Erie School District is minority, more than 50% black students. And black students are most affected by the school-to-prison pipeline. I was really disappointed with this panel, and I'm going to tell you why. Because you are not representative of the community. Okay? I don't see a minority person on the panel anywhere. And it's 2019. And I'm not mad at nobody. I'm just giving you facts, okay? So here we are. We're talking about diversity, inclusion, and equity, and it's not present. Yeah. And we wonder, well, what's wrong with our city? What's wrong with our city is that we are not inclusive. And if we want to solve problems, we have to become inclusive. Thank you. We have to become inclusive. And people who know me know I'm all about diversity, equity, and inclusion. So let's look at it this way. So you may be on TV tonight, and you're going to have black parents and black kids looking at you, and you don't look like them. But you're going to tell them what they should and should not be doing. There's a disconnect somewhere. And we need to start connecting. We need to start connecting by hiring more minority teachers. We need to start connecting by hiring more minority counselors. And I'm going to get on the criminal justice system. We need more minority parole officers, probation officers. We need more minority in mental health, so on and so forth. And I was really disappointed because I know black professionals who could sit right there at their table, and they're not present. So my question is, do you know us? Because we know you. We know who you are. Do you know who we are? And when people are left out, you know what happens? They become discouraged, they lose hope, and they misbehave. They misbehave. We have a problem that we can solve. but we cannot solve it by exclusion. We have to solve it by inclusion. Thank you.
I haven't said a word. Go ahead.
I had you back.
I know
Go ahead.
who's next.
Did you want me to continue?
You're good to go. Go ahead.
Was there panel input
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. That's true. So anybody want to respond to Mr. Johnson's comments?
He was right.
Okay.
Hello, my name is Cheryl Horton-Jong, and honestly, my questions were already down here before Mr. Johnson got up there. But one of the things I want to say is, first off, there is an issue with disproportionate administering discipline to students based on race, color, and national origin. That is a fact. We need to fix that. I'm not saying that you have an answer right now. We're aware, and we're just making you aware that we are, and it needs to be fixed, and it shouldn't be that far down on your list of goals to me. There are no minorities on the panel, and all of the students that wind up getting in trouble, the people that are issuing the judgment or the penalties, they look like you. They look like you. And so that can also harbor some kind of a negative approach to the system, making it work. A lot of the conversation that I heard tonight had to do with what I call kinder prison, because it sounded like it was preparing these children to be ready to go into that prison network. Now, my question is this: do you have, or would you consider having evidence-driven and document-based documentation on objectives, goals, and outcomes per student, because they are not from a cookie-cutter format. So if you guys could start trying to look to see who that student really is. I'm sorry we don't have art in school anymore, because I'm telling you, so much of this stuff would not be an issue if there was room for arts, something, you know, children. I love what you said about the pathway. I love that, but I heard a little bit about pathway, and everything else I heard about was how do you keep in time to get to the prison. I'm glad we're doing this. I commend you all. Like Mr. Johnson said, we do need to see more of who look like Christelle. Christelle's going in the system, but everybody that's sending her in the system, you know, here at least, it looks like they don't look like her. But thank you very much.
I'd like to say something.
Feel free. Mr. Fox?
Just a comment is that the part of the problem we have with black staff in my office is it's a state requirement that you have to have a bachelor's degree. And if you want to listen, just 1 second. If you look at statistics, we have very few applicants that even apply for our jobs. We have minority students or probation officers in our office. The problem is about why someone is not here, because they've only been there for a minute. Does Rhonda Champion still work for the school district?
Yes.
Rhonda worked in my office. Fantastic woman. Well, guess what? They stole her from us. Why? Probably because they offered more money. But she was a good employee of ours. We just don't have the staff who stay long enough. If they're a good employee, someone steals them and they move on. That's a big problem in our office. I'm here because I've been here for so long. I can answer questions about the system and whatnot. That's why I'm here. So that's an issue. And then my office, we don't control who comes to our office. We don't control what happens at the schools or what the police do. We get what we get, so that's what we deal with. So whether it's 90% white, 90% black, we don't have any control over that. It just, what it is what it is.
Would you be okay if I just, is that okay?
Sure.
Just 1 second.
The other thing
I
is-
think every one of the
Yeah.
panelists, feel free.
Because we talked about that, and this was going to be hopefully the first in a series, and we were hoping that this would generate some ideas for what the future could be. And it sounds like there's several people in the audience that want to be on that core group, and they need to talk to Mr. Richardson to see how they become part of that core group to be able to take the next step.
I guess what I wanted to do is I wanted to take a step back further. First, I don't think I've ever had anybody include me into the majority population, so that was a nice thing for me to kind of experience at once. But I know I look like I'm part of the majority. I get that. But being a transgender male, I face a lot of exclusion. I'm not even going to pretend for a minute that it is anything like what a black person faces. I'm not going to. I'm not going to compare them. They're not related. What I'm seeing, though, so sitting where I am and trying to hire into interviews, this is where we have to go back. The prison system came into place based very much on the slavery system. Let's be honest and let's be real, right? Okay? And so what we're seeing, though, is a lot of our, especially black men, now have records. So they can't get the funding to get the degrees to get to the jobs. So we're starting, the barriers get way before they even get the opportunity to even get up on the stage. We're seeing so many things that are coming into place that are built in by the systems, and it's preventing, it's just preventing at a state and federal level. I'm not making excuses. What I'm saying is it is broken way back here. It is broken way back here. And we are absolutely setting our kids up differently. We absolutely are. And we are. The kids are treated differently, and by the various systems that are at play. And I want to acknowledge that it's not fair. It is not, and we even pointed out like why we are a very white panel. This is a very white panel talking on behalf of minority populations, and I'm somebody who's always said that I don't want to ever speak on behalf of anybody. I don't. But if I was given an opportunity, and if I had an opportunity to maybe bring the little bit of knowledge that I had to the panel, I didn't want to pass that up.
Excuse me 1 second, panel. I'm going to be on your side and understand it's hard to hire minority officers. But for you to sit there and say it's because of a lack of a degree is unacceptable. Because you can always go out, listen, before you shake your head, Mr. Fox, I know a little bit more about this than you think. Okay, so why don't you guys recruit? Why don't you go to these colleges, go to these CJ classes, and ask these guys? The problem may not be your office. It may be because if you're an intelligent African American, you may not want to stay in Erie. You have to go out and actually make it inviting for them to stay here.
You're making the assumption that we don't do that. I sit on the Edinburgh University Criminal Justice Advisory Board. I go to their classes. We go to Gannon University.
And you're saying you can't get any of them?
All I'm saying is that you're asking if we try. We do go to those schools. We do talk to kids. We talk to kids, college students. We talk to them. We don't have a national budget to go to California or Arizona to recruit people, but we go to the local universities and colleges to do that.
What I'm saying is, I think your excuse that the bachelor's degree is the reason why you don't have diversity in your office is not a legitimate excuse, is what I'm saying.
The point I was trying to make is that there are certain things that have to happen. And when you look at the statistics of black men, black women who go to college, finish college, all of that stuff, the statistics of it, the pool of people available for employment decreases.
If you make your priority, sorry for interrupting you because I have to make this short. If you make your priority diversity, it'll happen. I understand what you're saying, Mr. Titus, okay? But you also understand that it may be a problem in the past, but we can solve this now. All you have to do is go out and recruit and make this inviting for them to come to your office. And maybe if you have someone in your office that looks like them and shows them that it's possible, they'll do it.
So I want to, can you go ahead and answer that question? I've been waiting patiently.
Okay. Thank you.
So do you want to respond to his question? Or?
Go ahead, sir. No, go ahead and ask your question. I'll refine it after we're done.
Okay, so I'm Pastor Snyder, pastor of St. James AME Church, and to show you the difficulty of how hard it is for African Americans to have a voice in the school district, our church is directly across the street from Piper Burley. We've been trying to do aftercare and before care. We try to do daycare, trying to partner with the school district. And for 2 years, I've been here. I'm working on my doctorate degree. My wife has 2 masters. Thank you for hiring her as a 4th grade reading specialist. But we're getting no assistance from what's supposed to be a community school with our church, we have retired principals, retired administrators, retired teachers. You recognize that there's more African-American males in college right now than ever before in the history of this country. And for you to make that statement that there's no, our church has connected 6,000 African-American churches across the country. We own 13 historical black colleges. The black colleges will come to you if you don't have the budget, but it has to be a conversation. People are not going to come and it's not a welcome voice. If you say that to a college recruiter, they'll look at you like, I'm not going to send my best and brightest to waste their time to have a conversation with you when you say there's not enough blacks with bachelor's and master's. That is just, you have to understand how that feels to us who have sacrificed and made our time and our effort to graduate coming from dysfunctional high schools. What I want to talk about is solutions. I want you all to think about most of the young children that you have to educate come from impoverished neighborhoods. They have 2 or 3 children. How much do you get per student to educate a child here in Erie? What do you get? How much is it from the state? Anybody knows?
Like 8,000.
Was like 18,000?
8,000.
$8,000. So if you have 3 kids, give the parents $24,000. Let them homeschool their children. Let them go on the internet. You eliminate a whole lot of problems. You eliminate poverty. You give them a classroom and a computer on the thing. You eliminate clogging up the court systems. You're dealing with 3 or 4 generations of children and parents who cannot read. So you have to, if we're going to continue to deal with school systems like horse and buggy, I don't want to go back to the rotary phone. I don't want to go back to a non-internet tank. We have artificial intelligence. We have to look at doing things differently to make the home functional. You're dealing with entrenched poverty. And for a kid to go to school and go home and there's no light, there's no water, there's no gas, and then we sit here and a lot of you have jobs based upon their dysfunctionality. So in Ohio, they started let the money follow the child. In New York, they've done the same thing with Harlem's Children's Zone. And they found out that the dysfunctional child has a social worker, a psychologist, a psychiatrist, a parole officer, all of that attached to their dysfunctionality. And none of them, like all of you say, I do the same program, I do the same program. All 3 of you up on the panel, and all I'm hearing, all of you doing the same thing for the same child. Take your salaries, judges, and all of you need to go back in the room and figure out all the budgets that are related to that dysfunctional child and give it to the family and help support the family to be successful at homeschooling. Because sending our kids to school now, as African American, I tell all my parents, homeschool your child. Because you're sending your kid to a classroom that is totally unmanageable. Because now you have, when I went to school, they had levels. If you had a learning disability or you had challenges, you were put in a classroom where those kind of things can be dealt with the appropriate help. Now teachers have to deal with kids all across the spectrum. And that's very difficult to have a classroom with child on medication. They have to give prescriptions. They have to, and it's very difficult. You have I pray for teachers because your job is almost literally impossible. When you're dealing with a classroom, you have children who are, all the way from all spectrums in the same classroom. Now I know the federal law say you got to do all that, but what I'm proposing is let's think outside of the box. Let's look at that family and think about that family with 4 or 5 children. Instead of giving that money to the school district, let's homeschool that child, eliminate poverty in that family, support that mother and father in educating themselves and their kids, because that's the model that's happening all across the country. I'm done.
Reverend,
I'm just saying, let's get out the box. Let's get out the box.
Can I just
Sure.
ask you? You did say your wife works for the school district.
Yes.
Is that correct? So
yes.
she is an employee of the Erie School District. The other thing I would say is, Mr. Nixon has the diversity committee. We would love for you to be a part of that committee. We need people who want to take action and assist and work with us. We don't want our families to homeschool. We want to be a part of their lives. We know education. We want to have people have a voice. That's why we're all sitting here. We are sitting here because we want to hear you. For our strategic plan, we had over 150 people from the community, from administrators, teachers, part of that to say, what does Erie School District need? And we would like to have you a part of that. We would want you to be a part of that.
Well, I'm opening up. I'm telling you, St. James AME Church is open to do whatever we can to partner with the schools. I want to do tutoring. I want to have access to the students, but we can't do it on a zero budget. Everybody else is getting paid. You have churches all around your school, pastors. You have church schools. You have vacation Bible schools. You have a lot of talent within the African American community who is shut out. And we don't get a chance to come to the table. You want us to do for free what everybody else on that panel is getting paid to do. I'm saying to you, look to the churches, allow us to help you and assist you so that we're not on the outside. I understand the difficulties that you have. I'm saying to you, the church can offer you some solutions because we can feed families, we can counsel the parents, we can call the grandmothers, we can knock on the doors, we can show parents the pathway to success. We can take kids down to Wilberforce University, which is down in Ohio. We don't care what their GPA is. We have a CLAM program. They can go to college absolutely free. But we can't, I'm shut out from trying to open these doors. And I can't get a voice. I hate to have to come to this kind of meeting to say, will you please let us help you? That's all I'm saying.
Before you leave, please touch base with Mr. Nixon so we can get you to come, and then we can talk with you about that next step.
Yeah, Pastor Snyder and I know each other well. We've worked together already. We can continue. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, my name is Antonio Howard. I'm Peggy's son. I'm proof that the body keeps score and that hurt people hurt people. I was 15 years old when I was sentenced to life in prison for a murder. I spent 26 and a half years, was recently released. I came to this forum thinking that I was going to hear something that would affect those, my own ilk. And obviously children are my ilk. I come from that demographic, we all do. But what stood out to me was that the panel seems to have a general consensus that children that make mistakes are worth saving, except those who kick and flail their hands and feet like children. There seems to be a standard that permits a child to be disqualified as a child so long as he commits an act of violence. I was one of those children. I was an extraordinarily violent child. I experienced extraordinary violence at the hands of my family, but most importantly, at the hands of teachers. That never went checked. I felt that I needed to check it. Started carrying knives, started defending myself. Realized that the shortest distance between childhood and respect was physical violence. Adults seemed to want to have a monopoly on physical violence and dominance against me. And once I freed myself, you left me to perverted, extraordinarily violent, and demonstrative animals in uniforms that didn't look like me. And that's what I heard on this panel. I appreciate you saving children who didn't do what I did. But I would thoroughly appreciate if you would consider at least attempting to include those like me in the saving. Thank you.
Can I?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I think every being has value. I think every being has value. My mom became a foster parent when I was 16 years old. I learned the system from the kids that we brought into the house. I'm the oldest of 12. I have dedicated my life. I wear an OCY hat because I saw what was flawed in the system and I wanted to come back in. I wanted to come back in. And so I'm here, and I spent my time at Harbor Creek Residential. I still go back out there, and I volunteer. Those are my favorite kids to work with because they are the most misunderstood, and they're the ones who need somebody to give them just a few freaking minutes to understand the path that they have walked. The body always keeps score. The brain does not forget what has happened to it, ever, ever. unless you have the time to process and heal that. And it doesn't just have to be an overt traumatic experience that we see. It can be all the systems that are causing the violence and the damage, and we can pretend all day long that we don't see it, but it's still happening. And that is why I'm up here. I knew sitting up here, being perceived as a cisgender white male, that I was not going to be well received. I knew it. And I'm not going to pretend to even understand what a majority of our community goes through. But I'm not going to stop fighting like hell for them. I'm not going to, because I care. And I know a lot of the people on this panel care. When I see these kids, and it rips my heart out. This isn't fair. The systems are set up wrong. They are set up wrong. And they are failing. They are failing the people who need them the most. And I agree. I agree with every person who's come up to this mic to tell me off. I agree. I agree with you. And that is why I'm up here, because I absolutely see, and I want to be part of that fight to make it better. It is broken. It is broken, and we need better solutions. So I'm not going to argue with any of you, because you are absolutely 200% accurate. You are. And I am so grateful that you came up and you spoke out, because there are people who need to hear. There are people who need to hear. So thank you.
This gentleman here.
Thank you. Adam Trott, I'm in a bunch of different community groups, but I want to hit on two things very quickly. And what's been said here tonight is just a mountain of evidence on these 2 points. One is that the programs you talked about tonight to address people at Crystal's age, you're way behind the chains, as they say in football. Tyler's right. You got to go way upstream from that. We need, you mentioned 2 of the 5 prongs were early learning and service learning. The earlier you catch the kids into that, the bigger bang for your buck you're going to get in investing in those programs. And hey, I'll do an unabashed plug. Our Kiwanis Club, we have student leadership programs. We have sponsored leadership programs, builders clubs, K-Kids, Key clubs. We're doing that. We're making groups. We got one in Lincoln. And that's where we should be investing. Everything we're talking about tonight about those older kids, that's triage at this point. You got to get them early. And there are already systems in place. They just need to be enhanced. So that's one point. We got to get way earlier on helping establish the community around these kids. And then the second thing, I wanted to address, like Tyler said, get upstream. And the whole relationship with police is, let's admit it, when I was a kid, I grew up with Adam 12, right? And every day that you saw that show, they showed you the side of the police car that said protect and serve. And never was there wicked disciplinarian put on that car, right? Then the war on drugs hits and everything, and all of a sudden the police find themselves, instead of being where you have a threat and you have an innocent, the police used to stand in front of the innocent and say, no, I'm not going to let you touch this person. Then the threat thinks about it, right? But at one point, it changed, and all of a sudden, that policeman, instead of standing in front of the innocent, he comes and clubs the threat. You're not even giving the threat a chance to think twice about what they're doing. So, you know, in deference to the police, we need to change the systemic environment that they're working in. We got to, like you said, where you're developing relationships, yes, a policeman used to be protection, not discipline. That's where we have to get to. Once we get that, now we start melting that wall. So getting in early and changing the whole aspect of what a police officer is, I think those would go miles into solving these problems.
Thank you. I know we're well over, and I know we still have a few closing remarks, so we'll take these last 2, and then we'll finish up. Sorry, Mr. Richardson.
That's all right. I'll try to go. Steve Hefner. I am a 26-year teacher in the Erie School District. I do serve on Mr. Nixon's Equity and Inclusion and Equality Committee. I am also on the Board of Directors of the Greater Erie Alliance for Equality. First of all, I would say, Ms. Page, your explanation of implicit bias is probably the best I've ever heard, and I thank you for that. My question is how do we take the reality of implicit bias with the reality of there are disciplinary issues, and how do we balance those so that we can effectively teach these children? Because, and then I guess my question for all of you is, how do we continue this conversation? So even though we look different, that we're here for the same reason. How do we develop a trust in each other so that you trust me and other teachers that even though we look different, we're here because we truly, genuinely care for the children that come see us every day. We want them to learn, we want them to succeed, and we want to do that job to the best of our ability, so they reach the... Wait a minute,
Jason,
hold on, sorry.
he's talking.
So I'm just saying, we need to continue this conversation so that we get to that level where we do trust each other and we work together, because honestly, that's why we're all here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Wow, there's some powerful stuff here. I'm Len Johnson. I'm founder of the Miriam Masala movement, which produced the first multicultural festival in Erie's history. Some of you know me, some of you up here know me. I've been pushing some kind of form to address this implicit bias for a long time, especially in the school district. You go back on your computer and look at 2011, I wrote an editorial, two-part editorial about that, which I paid dearly. Also, I paid dearly professionally for it, but I don't regret it. One thing that I think that's been missing in the conversation, which is kind of connected to this bias, is generational trauma. You know, it's particularly when it comes to minority community, black people in particular. I worked in and around the school district for a couple of decades. If I had a class full of kids, and let's say there was 50% white kids, 50% black kids, if I asked them, if you had somebody in your family, a close member of the family, a family friend that's been murdered, experienced violence, could you please raise your hand? Almost all the time, all the black kids are going to raise their hand. And really the white kids will. Please, sir, please. I'll build that to, thank you, sir, anyway. When I'm in the school district, I remember one time there was an incident in McDowell. There was a teacher, something happened to a teacher, and they pulled the counselors out of our school district and psychologists out of our school district to go out there and counsel the kids. Some of the kids didn't even know the person that was involved there, okay? In Erie, we know this murder has been happening consistently. There's been a murder the last couple of weeks. Who talked to these kids? Nobody. So what happens is the kids come into schools, they're traumatized. It could have been a family member, a close person that's experienced this violence, and no one's talking to them. So they start exhibiting behaviors that parallels a person who's been traumatized. So instead of dealing with that trauma, we have discipline. So it goes on and on and on. So I think that's something that needs to be addressed when we're talking about like the pipeline. We need to talk about how we're going to deal with this generational traumas that's been going on in our community.
So I believe that's actually a question we can answer. So, Natasha?
So I agree with you in both aspects. I agree that, yes, there is trauma. I am trained in trauma. I know that Piper Burley actually has trauma focus from family services within the school, but I also do agree that we are missing the mark. But when there is something huge that goes on in our community, we as mental health workers, we team up. Last year, we had a girl who committed suicide at a collegiate academy. We all fled. We all know that, listen, if they go to on-call, that's our #1 priority. There was one just not too long ago, one of our students down at our recovery academy, or so to speak, our AEP program, committed suicide. We all knew to team up and go. So we do miss the mark sometimes, but we do know how prevalent and how pivotal it is. And so we do reach out to those families. We are in a part of my job as a mental health specialist. Yes, I work with the individual child, but more importantly, I am always engaged with family, because I cannot fix a child when I send them back into the home and nothing is changing in their home. So that is very important to us. I know that maybe everybody on our board may not see that because that's not their role in school, but we do address it. And then I just wanted to add something very quickly, because it is a topic of discussion of our minorities and not having as many minorities in the school. I am a product, just like Ms. Page, of the Erie School District. I went to Pfeiffer, I went to Wilson, I went to Central. Mr. Hefner was one of my teachers, and I work with some of my teachers. And although we do not have what appears to look like us, I am not, so you all look at me and say I'm black. I am biracial. My mom was white, my dad is black. I didn't know my black family. My white family raised me. I'm not discarding that there isn't some things that we need to address, but I am going to admit that in my course of my life, it was some of my teachers, like Mr. Hefner, that stood out the most to me. There are good people in our district, but I think that moving forward, the first thing that we need to do in any trauma, anybody that knows anything about trauma, is first admit it. We have to admit we're missing a mark somewhere. And what can we do to go forward? As our panel has come up here, some of them, we are naturally that implicit bias that Ms. Page talked about. Implicitly, we say, no, we're not doing that, but we truly are, and it takes time to recognize that. So as we continue to have these conversations, I know it's frustrating to say, why is it taking so long? Why haven't we improved? We shouldn't be talking about it. It's 2019. This should already be addressed. But change doesn't happen overnight, unfortunately. Working with my children, and I've worked with children from as small as a trauma moving from the county to the city, as large as working with children who've witnessed their parents being murdered right in front of them. Change takes a very long time, and I know we're frustrated, but we can't give up the fight. And what I see here is people saying, I'm not gonna give up the fight. I might not got the answers right now, but I'm gonna keep on fighting. And we as a people have to come together, and we have to teach each other. Voting is huge. How many of our minority population is voting? And they don't have that federal, like Mr. Fox was saying. Some of them don't have the degree. Some of them been in his system, so they can't. A lot of people don't have that background. We're fortunate in Erie, unlike the Crystal from the show, who most of her background did have experience in the criminal justice. We necessarily don't. We have to educate and say, listen, get out there and vote. We have to make noise and say, why? What are you doing legislative down in Harrisburg of what's not going on? So we have to continue to fight. Well, you know what? This is what I am going to say. We do have meetings. Before I became a part of the Erie School District, I came to meetings. I was here every Wednesday. Jay Badams can attest. Ms. B can attest. I was down here making noise like y'all. Every single time I was down here saying, what's going on? Because my children go to Erie City Schools. And I'll be the first to say, no, we are not where we want to be. When I look at what my son at Strong Vincent is learning and what my friends is learning in Mill Creek, they're a little behind. But I also look at what's going on. Why aren't people sending a vote down to Harrisburg saying every single day, if it's the same message that you send out, what are we doing? Why aren't we holding ourselves accountable? Because even if they don't hold themselves accountable, what are we doing? This is my son who's in Strong Vincent. They went to school, they got the degree. I went to school, I got the degree. But we have to stand up and really make noise to say, what are we doing and what are we not doing? Because people are missing a mark, but we're missing a mark too.
Excellent. Mr. Richardson, can you, I'm sorry, one moment, but with the question with the trauma and Ms. Phillips, Brother D, do you mind coming up just real quick, talking about what some of the things that you've done? And I know we have assistant principals sitting here that, you know, when you talk about trauma, you talk about the real fact that we have violence in our city and it trickles into our schools. I think everybody here seems to be open to sit and kind of hear what's going on. So I apologize, Mr. Richardson, but I think we'd be wrong not to give some insight to some of the other things we do.
Real brief. Well, some of the things that we have done was the first thing we did was try to make people aware that the trauma was there. And we launched a campaign where we went to school. We held what was called trauma rallies, we felt that we had identified an area in Erie that was probably the most severely traumatized neighborhood in the city by the number of shootings, murders, and shots fired that had taken place in that particular area. And it seemed like it worked because people picked up the ball, and the next thing I know, because of the community school, we had a trauma task force, and it started to spread to other schools. But one of the things that we've done personally as the Blue Coats to make ourselves better is start addressing the trauma from a trauma-informed care status, which caused us to first have to deal with our own trauma, because what I think is happening is that we have a lot of unhealed healers operating on these kids at times. And until you deal with your own trauma, you're not fit to deal with anybody else's. So on a daily basis, we try to do that self-inventory and just make ourselves aware of what's going on with self first, and then be more empathetic and compassionate to those who are coming to us, as far as our children, using the information that we have from living in the neighborhoods, being aware of family struggles, and just be there for them, be empathetic for them, be loving to them, be non-judgmental to them, and never look at them from a position of looking down at them, but looking at a position from being them. And that's what works for us.
Thank you. And then we're going to have remarks from Mr. Richardson, and then Ms. Maggie Watts, and then we're going to wrap up. Just while Mr. Richardson's getting prepared, some of the questions and comments that were brought up that weren't really pertaining to this specific forum, we do have board meetings every month. It would be awesome to have you come down.
There's one tomorrow.
You call ahead. Thank you, Mr. Titus. You call ahead, and you actually can have 5 minutes of time to share out with some of your concerns. And if so, I just wanted to make sure that that's a great part of something that we already have in place that not a lot of our community take advantage of. So please come to the board meetings.
Mr. Nixon, the other thing was that if they had questions, they can put them on the cards. Do we have note cards and suggestions if they have something they would want us to get back to them on?
Yeah, we have note cards going around, as well as in the back, there's a suggestion bag. So there's colored note cards, pencils, papers. Please feel free to fill out. If you didn't want to come up and share, or you kept it to yourself, please feel free to write that down. The core committee will come back together, and we'll continue to move forward. Thank you.
Okay, it's almost 9:15, and I'll save a little time. I won't try those steps, and I'll tear up my closing remarks. Starting with Attorney Page, and many of the comments from the audience have dealt with an issue for which we would have had a completely different panel. We did not plan anything to do with bias tonight, except how it's implicit in the system. But we have a very good panel that is very knowledgeable about what happens to a person like Crystal if Crystal lived in Erie, and how she would be handled in the systems and the processes that Erie now has. So we've learned a lot about what those processes are from this panel. They are the people who do administer the interventions that are available to students. Now, why is it important to keep from kids and adults from out of prison? Well, we have, it's obvious that if you serve time in jail, there's a lot of problems for you and the families, and those persist. They are consequences after you've served your time, as people will tell you. There are at least 4 separate lifetime collateral consequences of nonviolent convictions. And this is explicitly allowed in the 1865 Abolition Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, and I quote, it's very short. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States. In your program that you got tonight, there's data about the Pennsylvania prison population. And you can see that in your printed program. We need to make better efforts to reduce the population of nonviolent offenders, both young and old, both white and black, with criminal records. That's my closing words. And Margaret Watts, a member of our core planning team and the NAACP and a retired retired public school educator, has a few closing words.
Getting lady talks, it's over, okay? I've warned some people. We want to recognize and thank the support staff for providing the setup and cleanup beyond the school day. Also, much gratitude to the technology support folks for providing the amplification, video, and filming of the forum to be posted on YouTube. This is a reminder to place your comments and questions on index cards provided into the suggestion bag provided. It's on the table in the hallway outside of the room here. You can add your contact information as well. Please include who you would like to respond to your question if you have a person that you would like to answer. Also, if you would like to be contacted for future events on this subject. For those of us who visualize this collective presentation, a dream has come true. The sincere effort put forth by each panelist, participant, speaker, and contributor, as well as a multitude of invested community members offering support and guidance in the earliest stages of planning this forum, should be highly commended. We recognized early on this forum would only graze the topic of the school-to-prison pipeline. It is only a beginning. We hope to present more opportunities for additional conversation and respectful exchange of thought among the greater Erie community. It is rare we see this collaboration across a variety of agencies and disciplines committed to present an open forum, inclusive of all members in the community, for learning and exchanging thoughts on an issue needing attention and public support. Much gratitude is felt from those of us who recognize these individuals, the audience, for generously and collaboratively giving us this wonderful gift on the 90th birthday of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who dedicated his entire life bringing people together for a common cause, ensuring civil rights and social justice for all. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great evening.